Productivity apps are things like Trello, Goodreads, MyFitnessPal, Brainscape, and Mint Budget Tracker. They're designed to help users manage different aspects of their lives, and we've seen this type of app take many forms for personal use, education, and business streamlining. That said, it can be hard to find the right platform that will allow you to create the customization you need for your specific use case and/or industry. That's why in this complete walkthrough video, we're not just going to be covering whether you can build a productivity app on Bubble. I'm also going to guide you through the development of core features so you can work toward launching your own app. Stick around until the end because we're also going to look at some actual examples of productivity apps some of our own clients have built on Bubble. To begin, let's understand what a productivity app entails and explore some common and niche examples. These apps allow you to efficiently organize various types of content, such as text, images, and documents, while also facilitating collaboration among teams. In a business setting, they can help you manage important documents, track transactions, and manage teams as well. Some examples of these apps include Dext, QuickBooks, and InkFile. For personal use, productivity apps can help you track your health or curate content for personal development. We can see this in apps like Goodreads, Mint Budget Tracking, and MyFitnessPal. We're also seeing productivity apps target education, such as Brainscape and Blinkist. These kinds of apps help you manage your study resources. They can help you discover or research ideas and also consume learning content in an organized way. The common thread we're seeing in productivity apps is that they help you organize content so it's more accessible. And it's through these core features that are making that happen. First, category, folder, and tag management. Efficiently categorize your content to more easily navigate and retrieve it. Notes and comments. By adding notes and comments to your content, you can foster collaboration and provide additional context. Data imports. Being able to seamlessly import data from various sources ensures a smooth transition to apps during onboarding. It may even be a core functionality that the user experiences multiple times. Now, your productivity app might require niche features. Some of the features we've seen our own clients implement include user-owned lists. So if users can create personalized lists to curate and organize content according to their preferences and their needs, they'll find it more valuable and keep coming back. Data exports. You can enable your users to export their data for further analysis or integration with other tools. Compatibility with the outside world might be a must-have feature for your use case. And what about discovering new content from curated recommendations? If your app can frequently provide fresh content to your users, this is just another capability that'll keep them coming back for more. Now, we recommend our clients use Bubble.io to develop their productivity apps, and here are a few key reasons why. First is custom data management. Bubble offers robust data management capabilities, including custom data structures, importing data, filtering, searching, and updates via API. Also, custom data access rules. With Bubble, you can define custom permissions, distinguishing between private and public data, personal and shared resources, and controlling all of the standard create, read, update, and delete levels of permission. Bubble also has the flexibility to connect to third parties. By connecting your app with external databases, expanding file storage capabilities, importing data via APIs, and more, really the extensibility is almost endless. A common question we get about building a productivity app is, can my users collaborate on content? Absolutely. This is typically supported by specific data structures and permissions you create for your users to view and/or edit content created by others. The interface's design is completely up to you, but the secret to making collaboration work well is really in the data structure, as that's the thing that dictates how open and how real-time collaboration can be. All right, now that we've covered all our bases around what a productivity app entails and a few key components that make Bubble the best platform for creating this type of app, let's dig into the actual feature set your app will likely need. In order to build a reliable productivity app on Bubble, strong content organization is a must, not only from the backend database perspective, but also for the front-end experience your users are going through. Productivity is often all about organization. So I'm going to show you how you can manage categories or tags or a foldering system in Bubble. These are features we've helped our own clients build over and over again. In this Bubble application, I've created a page where I can manage categories. That way I can associate those categories with my books. So the books is going to represent any custom content that you might have in a productivity app. And I'm also bundling the concept of categories, tags, and folders under the same umbrella here, because really at the end of the day, the idea is that you want to organize your content with some kind of a tagging or foldering system. It's to help your users find the content more easily, right? So on the left, I have a list of all my categories. There's an input that I can type in. This is me as a user, right? This is all at the front end. All of this is in Bubble. And I can set up a new category. So let's create a category for, let's say, travel, right? That's just going to be a genre for my book list here. Immediately, this is added to the end of my list. I can see that there are 0 books tied to that category because I just created it. And over on the right, if I wanted to, let's say, associate this book Dune here with that travel category, I'll click on this area over on the right, right? So I've made it kind of intuitive for the user to see, okay, here are some categories. If I want to modify those, I can open that up. It opens up an editor area for me, and I can select from all of my categories, choose travel, and that instantly saves it and shows me the updated list here. You'll see that there's 2 books that don't have categories. So we're going to help the user understand, instead of showing a blank space there, I can click on this button to begin adding my first category. So in this case, I'll choose biographies. I'll do the same thing for Goodnight Moon. I might do kids bedtime. I might also add, let's say, favorites, right? So now all of my books have at least 1 category. We can see the counts are updated in real time. Remember, my new travel category had 0 before, now it has 1. Notice how it says 1 books. You can absolutely change this so that if it's in the singular form, right, it removes that S. I just haven't added that logic in. Now, if I want to search by category, I've created a custom search system for this. Now, Bubble does have some elements that can help make this simpler for you, but I really want to show you the level of customization that you have the ability to do here. So I'm going to click on something that looks like an input, but it's actually not. So clicking on this will show me another group that has listed all of my categories, and it actually also has a count of the category of the number of books within that category. So I can see that under favorites there are 4 books. I'm actually going to remove one of let's clear out the categories for this one. Okay, so that you can see for actually let's get rid of the biographies altogether. Right, okay, so now the biographies category has 0 books, and when I look at it here, notice that the count is no longer present because the user doesn't need to see a 0 there. They also don't need to see the parentheses. So there's a lot of conditional logic happening behind the scenes to make this really easy and smooth for the user to work with. So let's say I want to choose some categories. I'll select favorites. I'll also select book club. Now notice what happens when I choose them. The buttons here are colored differently, so it's very obvious what I've selected. I can also see my choices up here. Now, this little group here is something that is only going to display as long as I want it to be there. So I can click out and it'll automatically close, right? If I show it, click out, it closes. It's a very common type of element to only present it when the user needs it. But notice how my selected categories remain there so that I can, remember that I'm currently filtered on my list. I can also select all of my categories to just check everything easily, and I can also deselect, right, for quick access to those. Okay, so this is a demonstration on the front end of a categorization system or a tagging system that you can implement in your productivity application. Again, there's a lot of different directions you can take all of this stuff. You can put categories in a hierarchy and create subcategories, right? You can have folders and subfolders. You can search through things in kind of a real-time search and have everything update as you select. I think actually that's happening. Yeah, that's happening here. You can have these filters work with other filters that you might have. Maybe you want the user to type in the name of the book as well, in addition to the category. All of this is absolutely under your control. So let's jump into the editor to see a little bit more about how this was put together. So first of all, I always like to go to the data structure because that's really what drives everything. So the data types involved are my book data type, right? That's my actual content of my app. So my book is going to have a title, and it's also going to have a relationship to a list of categories. These are the 2 fields that I'm working with at the moment for this demonstration. Now, this list of categories is actually a relationship with another data type. So I have category here, and that data type just has a name field. So if we take a look at our raw data in the database, here are all of my books. Okay, so I have 7 total in my database. Those are all of the titles, and you can see the categories are listed there as well. But again, this is a relationship field. If I go over to my category table, this is my full list of categories, right? So that's essentially what we're seeing on the left here, all the categories and the books on the right. So now let's go over to the design. Okay, so on the left-hand side, I have a repeating group that is going to go search for all of my categories so I can see what I have available to me, right? Just a plain search, no constraints here, and I can sort by, just sort it alphabetically. Now, this is another area where you can really customize this functionality. You can make it so that users can create their own categories and basically merge together any categories that you want to provide from the platform perspective with any private categories or tags or folders that your users are creating. It's just all in your queries of your database and how you structure that content, who's going to own what, right? This is all around privacy rules as well. Now, inside of the cell for the repeating group of categories, I have an input here so that if I wanted to change the category name, I can. By default, it will show that category name. So let's go back to our preview, and let's say I want to call this, let's say favorites, and I'm just going to put I like these, something like this. Okay, so you see immediately that updated everywhere because I have a real-time change happening in a workflow. As soon as I make a change to this input, you'll notice that the name was updated, and so everywhere I'm referring to the name, it's going to update there as well. I'm going to clear this out. I could even use an emoji in here. Let's insert a little heart emoji for our favorites. We'll do that one like this. Okay, there you go, and see how it updates everywhere. Okay, I'm going to remove this now. Go back into the editor. And over to the right side, we have our count, right? So I need to dynamically find how many books do I have that are associated with this category. So I'm doing a standalone search here where the category field, remember this is that relationship field, contains the current cell's category. And then we'll just display the word books there. So it'll do a real-time count, and that's what we end up seeing here. 3 books, 4 books, 1 book. I'm actually going to show you how you can get rid of this S if the count is singular, like this, if there's only 1, right? Because if it's 0, we do want to say books, 0 books, or if it's plural, anything beyond 1, 3 books, 4 books. So let's add a condition to this text. I'm going to add a condition here. We're going to do the same search. I'm going to search for books where the categories contains the current cell's category. And if this count is 1, I'm just typing in the number 1 there, then we're going to change the text to simply say book, just like that, right? So it either say books, the number of books there, or, oh, we need to have our count in there as well. We'll type in 1 book, just like that. Okay, so I'm going to refresh the page so that we can see this update. We'll make it a little bit more grammatically correct here. There we go. 0 books, 3 books, 4 books, and 1 book for that one. All right, next to that, we have a remove button so that if I wanted to clear out a category, this will trigger a workflow to delete it, right? If I don't want it in the system anymore. You can also make it so that if there are currently books tied to the category, you stop the user from deleting it. Maybe you show them a pop-up and say, hey, before you do this, you currently have books associated with this. Are you sure you want to delete? And if you do proceed, keep in mind that those are all going to be removed from your book. Or maybe, discard, never mind, close it. You don't want to change anything. So all of this is just in the conditional logic when you click on the button for the workflows. So speaking of workflows, let's take a look at the ones that we have here for the create button and for the remove. For creating, I'm going to create a new category and save whatever I type into this field here as its name, right? So I'll go to this button. I'm going to edit the workflow. And here is our workflow for creating a new category. We're going to map that input's value to the name field for the category. This is literally the only field the category has, this data type, I should say. And then we're going to reset the inputs. That way, as soon as I create a new category, this input will clear out, and it's another visual cue to me, in addition to seeing the new category show up in the list, that something has happened. Now for the remove, let's go to that workflow. This is simply going to delete the category. Really easy. This is a data action that Bubble has here when we're wanting to work with the database. You can create, modify, delete, make copies, download things, lots of different functionality that you can work with there. All right, so now let's go over to the right side where we are actually implementing the categories and applying them to the book. So there's a little bit more going on here. Let's start with the this fake input that I've designed here. I wanted it to look like an input, but it's not actually one. So this is actually just a group that contains a text, right, to act as kind of like a placeholder type of thing, a little piece of instruction. And in the condition, if I have selected categories, instead of the placeholder, it's just going to tell me which categories I've chosen. So we'll talk about this logic here in a second. So again, just as a reminder, if I click on this and I select a few categories, that text changes to show me what my selections were. And notice that there was also a color change. Very subtle, but I think it makes a difference in keeping the user, oriented, right, where they are in kind of the settings here. All right, so what happens when I click on this, since this is not an input? Well, I'm actually showing this element here. This is a group focus element. This is something that is attached to another element. That's why it shows right next to that input. Of course, I can create some offsets if I want a little bit of space there. And inside of the group focus, I have another repeating group. We have 3 repeating groups, at least. Yes, 3 repeating groups on this page. The list for the books, the list for the categories, the list for the books over here, and then another mini list of categories for me to choose from. So this is just a search, no constraints or anything. And inside of this, I'm displaying the name of the category, and I'm also displaying the count of how many books are linked to that category. And I'm using a lot of dynamic expressions here because every category is going to present a different piece of data. Right? So here's the name. Then I'm going to search for books with this category, count them up, and I'm going to do an evaluation. I'm going to create a true or false statement. If this search's count results in a number that is greater than 0, right? If that evaluates to yes, right? Because I'm making this a true statement, or right, if this is true, then I'm going to show the count of the books inside of my parentheses. If this is not true, right, if the count is 0, then I'm going to leave this blank. And that's why we get this here where most of our categories have numbers inside of the parentheses, but biographies is blank. We don't have the parentheses. We don't show 0. Okay, so that expression is evaluating to false for that particular category. And so we're doing another search here based on the category. There's also, by the way, lots of other ways to approach these values with different expressions depending on your data structure. So if we took advantage of list fields a little bit more, I could also cut down on the number of searches that I'm using in these expressions. But searches are really kind of the bread and butter of everything, and it's important to understand how to use those so you can query your database properly. But don't forget about those list fields because they can also help with your performance. They can also help keep your workload down. In the conditions, for this little button here, right? This guy right here. So if I hover over this, look what's happening. The color changes subtly. It's this light purple background. If I've selected it, it's going to be that dark purple. Okay, so that's what those 2 conditions are doing. If this is hovered, I'm going to change the background color. I'm going to change the font. And then if it's selected, we're going to also change the colors. Now, the selection is leveraging a custom state. That's a way to keep track of a temporary value. It's not something that's updating in the database. It's, if I were to refresh the page and if I had last selected this and I refresh the page, it's not going to remember my selections. It's a temporary value. So the custom state lives on my group focus element. I can put it wherever I want, and I chose to put it here because it's kind of related to this design here. So I have a custom state called selected categories. And I've defined it to be a list of categories. It's kind of like creating a field in my database, but it's more like a temporary field just on this page. So whenever I click on my category button here, I'm going to trigger a workflow to update that state, right? So I actually have 2 workflows here. 1 click if I don't currently have it selected, and 1 click if I do, right? This one here has a condition. If I've clicked on the button and the selected categories, that's my custom state, doesn't currently contain my category that I've just clicked on, then I'm going to update the state to add it to the state list, right? So I'm taking whatever the state list is currently and adding the current selected, the selected category. So if this is the first category I'm selecting, we have an empty list and adding the first one. So it's kind of like saying 0 plus 1, it gives us 1. Once I click on the second one, 1 plus 1 is 2, right? We have 2 items in there. And then we have the opposite. If I click on this and the selected categories already has it, then that means that I'm deselecting, right? It's this situation here. I've deselected favorites. I'm deselecting save for later. So what I'm doing is I'm removing the selected category from my list. I'm using a minus item operator. So this custom state is the thing that is changing the data source in my repeating group of books. It's also the thing that is changing the appearance properties of the button, right? Here we go again with this custom state. If the list contains the selected category, or I should say the cells category, then it changes the way that it looks to make it obvious to the user that that's what they've chosen. So the repeating group down below, this is a repeating group of books. The data source is going to search for books just by default. And in the condition, if I can see that I have at least one category, right? You see how much repetition is happening here with these expressions. The more you work with this, the more you're exposed to kind of the same trends and patterns and things. And it's easier to understand kind of where you need to go, for all of your features. You just kind of keep getting your hands on it, right? So the selected categories, if I have at least one, count is greater than 0, then I'm going to change my data source. So I'm going to do my search. I'll still sort by their title, but now I'm going to add a filter. Okay, now this type of filter is an advanced one because a book can have multiple categories, and I can select multiple categories for my filter. So when I'm doing a search by category, I want to return any book whose list of categories intersects with my selected categories. As long as there's one intersection of a category. So, right, we see that category in both lists. In the books category list and in my selected category list for my filter. As long as there's one intersection, that's a book I care about and I want it to show up in my list here. That's exactly what this advanced filter is doing. Find me books where its category list intersects with my selected categories. Here's our custom state. As long as that count is greater than 0, that's a book that I want to keep in my search result. I don't care which category it is. I just want to find one matching one. Right? So if I choose favorites, then all of these will show up here, even though they have other categories that, they may not match up otherwise, right? iRobot is favorites in science fiction, whereas Where the Crawdads Sing is book club and favorites. So they don't line up with science fiction, but they do line up with favorites. So if I removed favorites and let's say just science fiction, I have a much smaller list here. Where the Crawdads Sings goes away because I haven't selected a category that is tied to it. All right, so there we have it. There's a look at creating a categorization system. You can also use these same concepts for tags. You can also use it for folders too, if it makes more sense to kind of see it from the perspective of folders, if you're associating with documents, right? It could be multiple items that are tagged with the same tag or organized under the same folder. Now, one more tip that I'll leave you with for this demonstration is the hierarchy system is actually pretty easy to implement. Let's say you wanted to create a subcategorization process. You'd want to add a new field here to associate any given category with a parent category. Okay, so this is going to be a relationship to another category record. With this structure alone, you can create an infinite number of levels in a hierarchy. Okay, and I'm going to show you why. So let's say we have another category here called Europe. All right, so I have Europe and I have travel. Now I want to put Europe underneath travel. Travel should be the parent category of Europe. So within the Europe data record, I'm going to search for the travel record. So I've related them to each other. Okay, so now in my design, I have the ability to show items that belong to another item. This is all going to be in the design of how you do repeating groups, how you indent things, how you filter things. Because travel doesn't have a parent, we can assume that this is at the top of the hierarchy. But because Europe does have a parent, we know that it is a subcategory. I don't necessarily need to have a list of all of the subcategories under travel, but as long as I have the relationship from one end here, I have everything I need to design a hierarchy system or a folder and subfolder system. All right, hopefully you were able to take something away from this for your own productivity apps. Now, we often get asked about user-generated categorization. The question is typically something like, can I have a predefined list of categories that I create, but also allow users to create their own? And the answer is, of course you can. The key here is that if you're going to enable categories or a tagging system or folders to be generated, then you have to organize them in a data type, not in an option set, because option sets cannot be modified by your users. And make sure there's a relationship between the categories and the creator so that you have the ability to keep them private to them if you want. Productivity apps can be found in many industries and serve a variety of markets. This includes organizing content for individual use, such as personal development, as well as team or group uses, such as project management. No matter the use case, you're still working with user-generated content, and your users are going to want to mark up that content. Notes and commenting systems are incredibly popular and useful for productivity apps. When we have a client come in with a productivity app, it's almost guaranteed that they'll be building out some kind of a note-taking or commenting system. Let's dive into a demonstration of how this can be done in a Bubble app. On this Bubble page, I've designed a note system for my books. So the first thing that I'm going to see here is a list of all of my books, and I can easily tell which books have a note versus which ones don't because of the way that I've designed the icon here. So there's a conditional statement on this that tells me, hey, you have at least one note associated with this book. And so if I click on it, I'm going to now see all of the notes, it could be one, could be multiple, that are tied to this book. Notice that I am keeping track of which book I've selected here. It's going to give me a quick count. I have the ability to add a new note. And down below, I have a list of all of my existing notes. This is fantastic for personal record keeping. This is something that you can expand to kind of a collaboration setting. So you can either leave notes to be visible only to the creator of the note, or they can be shared if people are part of a team. As long as they belong to the team, they can see any notes owned by that team, right? Lots of ways to do that kind of access. But the main takeaway here is that there's a relationship between a book and one or more notes. And then in the design, you can make it easy for the user to contribute further to the list of notes. So for example, I'm going to say here, I really enjoyed reading this book. Now I'm using a plugin that Bubble has called the Rich Text Editor. There are other inputs that are more plain text where you don't have to have all of this formatting here. But for a system like this, I think it's really convenient to offer the user some formatting capabilities. It can really help them organize notes, especially if we're expecting them to type in maybe multiple paragraphs, bullet lists, things like that. So I'll type in my content, I'll click on Add Note, and you can see my new note has been added to the list. I can edit an existing note. So here is an example of some formatting changes here. Because I'm editing an existing note, my button changes to say Save Note as opposed to Add a New Note, right? So I can say within this existing note, edit, I'm making a change, right? Maybe we'll put that in bold there, and I will save that note. You see how everything clears out for me. If I want to go into this note here, I don't need to change anything, discard changes, it returns me back. It doesn't change the note. Go back to this one here, I can see that my edit is still there. I can also remove my notes. I'll click on this button and it just deletes the record. So we'll take a look at the backend structure, but the notes are individual records in their own table. And for any books that don't have any notes, right, we see the same interface except there's no list down there yet because we don't have any notes yet. So here's another book with one note. There's another book with one note. Okay, so I'm just passing data from the left side over to the right side so that we can see the information that's actually associated with what I've chosen. So let's jump into the editor and see what's necessary here to make this happen. So again, our data structure, we're still working with the books, and we're now working with another list field here, list of notes. So this is a separate data type where we'll have the content of the note and a relationship back to the book. Okay, so in our design, I have just a repeating group to show my books. Nothing fancy going on here. It's sorting by their title. And I have an icon to help me understand which books have a note and which ones don't. So by default, I have this kind of open icon. It's not filled in the color. It does have a just kind of an outline. And in the condition, I'm going to say, if this current sells books notes, right, this is the list of notes within the book, if that count is greater than 0, doesn't matter how many exactly, just as long as there's at least one, we'll change the icon. So I'm using a completely different icon. You see the outline versus the filled in one. I think that's enough to indicate to the user that, hey, this book has notes here. Now, this is a great example of leveraging a list field for a record to cut down on a search, right? I'm going to, sorry, it's not in that one, it's in this data type here. I'm leveraging this field. This is the one that I'm going to for that condition. I could, in theory, I could search through the notes data type and filter on the book field. I could say search for all notes where the related book equals the current cell's book. And that would have given me the exact same result. However, it's an unnecessary search, right? If I have the ability to go through the list, it's a much more direct thing, and it's less workload units that we're using. So that's our left side. On the right side, we have a bit more going on here because this is very dynamic, this right side, right? We're only going to see information related to what we've selected. And if you remember, when I was first on this page, we actually were only looking at the list of books. This group over to the right actually did not show until I selected something. And that's because I have a condition on it. So let's take a look at that group. That's this one right here that I've called selected book. Now, this group is acting as a data source because when I click on a book, I want to send data over to it dynamically through the workflow. That's actually what's happening when I click on that icon that is over here. Right, so we're going to reset some things inside of the group just to make sure, if I'm jumping around between my books, that the input fully resets, that, I don't have anything hanging around there. So that's what these two actions are for. And then I'm passing data over to the group on the right. Right, that's my selected book, and I'm passing in the current cell's book. So that dynamically changes the data source of our container. Now, anything that's inside of the container can easily reference the selected book. Okay, so for example, I can show the book's title. I can show the book's note count. Again, notice how we're not doing a search here. We're just going to the list field and counting up the items in the list. And inside here, I have a rich text input. I'll point out the plugin that we're using for this. This is this one right here. It's a Bubble plugin. Really great tool for any kind of, creating of messages or content, emails, things like that. And you'll see that inside of this, we're displaying the parent group's notes content. This rich text editor is actually sitting inside of its own group, where the type of content is now a note, right? So we kind of have a mix of data sources here. Selected book is pointing to book. Group note is pointing to note. That's so that when I select an existing note, I can do a very similar thing, right? I clicked on the icon over here and it passed data to this big group. I can do the same thing, click on the edit button and pass it over to this subgroup to work with the individual note, right? I also have a dynamic text here that is by default hidden, right? We're not seeing it there, but in the condition, if I can see that I'm currently editing a note, and I know that if the parent group has a data source set to it, right? There's a record that's been passed to it. Then I make it visible. That tells me that I have something to discard. Otherwise, if it's empty, I don't need to see this text and I don't want to confuse my user. My add note button is also has a conditional appearance change. So by default, it'll say add note. But in the condition, again, if I find that I've passed a record to it, then it's going to say save note because that tells me that I'm currently editing a note. Down below, we have another repeating group for our notes, and take a look at the data source. We're not doing a search here. We're taking advantage of the list field. The parent group's books, list of notes, right there. Inside of this, I'm displaying some relevant content for the note. So I'm showing the creation date, just showing it the date without the time, although I could format it however I'd like. I'm showing a portion of the content. So notice how my note actually gets cut off. That's intentional so that this is more legible, right? They just need a little preview to understand what the note is, and then they can hit edit, or if you want to say view or something like that, you could show the whole thing. This part is up to you, right? I've chosen to cut it off, but you can of course show the whole thing. And the way that I cut it off was here inside of the, let's go to this text. I've given it a fixed height, right? So if there was more content, it would have to expand in height to display, but I fixed it. So that's what cuts it off. It prevents it from expanding further. I've also got my edit and remove buttons. So the edit button is really passing the data over to that note group, right? Just like I did with the sticky note icon. This is doing a display data, and I'm also setting focus to the input so that the user can start typing right away. That's a nice little convenient touch there. And then remove is just going to delete the record, right? Nothing fancy here. It's going to delete the note altogether. and it will instantly disappear from the repeating group because it no longer exists in the database. We don't necessarily even have to update the book record. If we delete the record altogether, it's no longer going to be in the books list. Okay. Now, there you have it. That's really a simple, clean way to manage notes. You can do a very similar thing with comments, right? You think of a comment as multiple notes that are attached to something like a post, right? Or a project type of thing. And you can have multiple people contributing to the same entity, right? So if I am in a book club and multiple users are talking about the exact same book entity here, we can all contribute to the book. And I could have information about the author of the content or of the note, right? We can have a conversation here. We can really create like a thread system. I could also create replies to my notes and comments by having a parent-child relationship between multiple notes or multiple comments. It's a lot of flexibility you have here. And again, as you'll find, a lot of this stuff really just comes down to your data structure. How you want to organize the content you want to capture from your user will absolutely dictate how you can present it back to them in these interfaces here. All right, hopefully you took something away from this that you can apply to your own productivity apps. Now, while messaging applications are an entirely different product category, a common question we get related to productivity apps is, can I mention collaborators inside my notes or comments, or search through these notes to pull up a past conversation? And the answer is, you've guessed it, 100% yes. Depending on the complexity of the inline messages or search, you might want to incorporate some plugins, but these capabilities are absolutely possible in Bubble, and we've seen our own clients implement them successfully in their apps. Productivity apps at their core are data management systems. Now, in Bubble, you can design your data structure however you want, which means you can create records directly inside the app. But depending on your use case, you may need to pull in data from the outside world, whether it's for you as the admin to load the app with a starting library of content, or if the user is expected to come in with their own external data. In Bubble, you have several options for importing data. Let's take a look at an example of how you can have your users import their own data. And this is something, again, we see our own clients creating for their own productivity apps. On this Bubble page, I've designed a data import flow so that a user can come in with a CSV of their own information and have it imported into the app. That way they can continue working with the information in the app, however it's been designed. So here's an example. I'm going to click on my file uploader and I'm going to pull in my CSV. So here we're working with a list of movies. This is going to display a mapping tool. Now I'm actually using a plugin for this, which I'll point out. And the mapping tool is going to help me map any fields that are coming in from my CSV that aren't an exact match with the way that I have structured things in my database in the app. Now, I actually happen to have an exact match. So my column headers in my file had title and author. And if they were something different, I would be able to choose, okay, for this particular column, let's say that it was name, right? The word was name. I'm going to associate it with the title field in the Bubble application. Or if what I came in with was author name and not just author, I could choose, hey, this application is looking for something related to an author. I know that that's the best match, and so I'll select that. But because I came in with an exact match already, this plugin tool has identified, hey, you've already got it, you're good to go. We're going to select these for you because they're an exact match. It's a very convenient thing, especially when you expect your users to come in with different formatted files. You also have the ability, this is something you can do, and we see our clients do all the time too, because sometimes it's actually easier to provide your users with a template. You have the ability to do that. So what you'd have is a link element that they can click to download a template for the format. So you provide them with an empty spreadsheet where the column headers are already in place, right? If I click on this, it's just going to download, it looks like that's tied to a missing file. I might have deleted that one. But it would trigger an automatic download to my computer. Let's actually update that real quick. I'm going to come in here so you can see it working. And if you ever run into this yourself, you know how to troubleshoot it. So I believe this is a file that I was working with before that I've since deleted. So I'm going to remove that, that address. I'm going to go over into my database, head over to the file manager, and I'm going to choose this one here. I'm going to copy this address. So that's a previous upload that I've done. And I will add that in there, and I'm going to refresh my page. We'll close this down. And what I want to see is that when I click on the link, it triggers an automatic download of that file. So this link element is pointing to an external URL, so it's just the pathway to that file itself. And, with links, if it's something that the browser can handle, sometimes it'll be able to open it. Otherwise, it'll just download it to the computer. And then here's my anchor text so that the user can see what this is actually going to do. So I'll click on this here, and you see how it opens up my file window. Hopefully you can see this, but it's just asking me to type in the name before I save it to my computer. Okay, so that's also helpful, like I said, if your users may come in with files that don't exactly match your field names, and maybe if you don't even want to provide this mapping tool, you can help them by giving them a template. All right, so let's move on to the next step here. So let's say upload now. It's going to take the file, and here we have things getting parsed out. Okay, so I see the title, I see the author. I've put these values into inputs in case I want to edit them before I create these items in my application. Now, I actually have a book database. I know that I pulled in a file called movies. I think these are movies here. This is just sample data I pulled offline. But let's assume that these are books, right? So a book is also going to have a title and an author. And if I click on Add to Library, it has created a record in my database. And I have a condition on this button to say, hey, you're done with this one, right? I can click on another one here that can help me keep track. So if I go back into my database, just to confirm here, and over to the books table, I can see that the last two that were added here, these are the two that I selected, right? I have a title, an author. I don't have categories or a note, but this is just to demonstrate, how one way of presenting an upload like this. It doesn't have to work this way. I could have also set up a system where once I click upload, it sends all the information to a back-end workflow, especially if I expect many items, right? I might not want the user to have to go click, click, click through everything, and automatically move through the entire list and create the records one by one, right? And then after the fact, you can present it back to the user if you want, like once the records are created and they can edit it from there. What I'm doing here is just parsing out a smaller list, presenting it to the user so that he can see what is in the file and make a decision from there. Maybe they don't actually want to bring everything in. Now, in Bubble, there is an action, I'm going to show you here in the workflow, under the data area, to upload data as a CSV. This is one of the most straightforward ways to import a CSV file into your application. This is completely separate from this plugin. All this action needs is a file. So you can reference the file uploader directly if you wanted. And you just need to tell Bubble which data type do you want to import these CSV rows into. So once it runs this action, let's say you have a file with 100 rows. This action will create 100 records, one for each row for the data type that you've selected. Now, keep in mind that this is actually a paid feature for this particular action. And depending on the plan that you're on, it's going to dictate how many rows you're able to upload per file. Okay, so just be mindful of that. Now, plugins like this one here can help you work around that limitation if you involve the backend workflow to create kind of a recursive loop of moving through multiple files all at once. So there's a bit more advanced logic to make that happen, but it's absolutely doable. So what we have here in this design is I've got a file uploader so that the user can choose their file from their device or their computer. I already pointed out the link element here, right, so that they can download that template if you want. And down below, I have a system for parsing out the details of that CSV. Okay, I've intentionally designed this so that you can see how to create things one by one from this parsed out system. The only workflow I have in here is to add directly to the library one at a time, right? We're creating a book here, author and title. Before I show you what's going on with the parsing, I could have also done the following. I could have triggered a workflow that comes with this plugin. Oh, let me actually point out the plugin. Let's go over here. It's this one right here. 1T CSV Uploader. It's wonderful. We use it all the time with our own clients who have to upload things or have to have their users upload things. And this plugin comes with a workflow event that triggers as soon as it is completed with its own kind of parsing of the files, right? When I click on this button and it's done its thing, it can automatically trigger this workflow event, because it will generate one or more files for you from the original file that the user has selected. This can actually help you break up a large file into multiple subfiles, which is how you can automate a big upload for your users. So one thing I could have done was trigger this workflow and scheduled a backend workflow on the list of files, right? The type of thing here would be file. My list to run on would have been this CSV uploader's list of files, and I would have selected a backend workflow that I have in my application. I could have scheduled it to happen, immediately, current date and time, and that backend workflow would have run per file the upload data as CSV action, and that could have helped me save a lot of clicking, right? I wouldn't have had to go through one by one, especially if there were a lot of rows involved. Okay, now I'm just going to remove that because we're going to leave it to what we have here, which is just doing a quick little list, adding things one by one. Now, in order for me to parse out the title and author into specific inputs that I've designed on the page, I'm actually leveraging another plugin called the JSON manipulator. Now, JSON is not bubble specific. This is just kind of a standard format of organizing data. And the CSV uploader actually provides the CSV content in a JSON structure. And I'm using this plugin to help me separate everything out into individual inputs. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds on this one. This one is a little bit more advanced to do that. But I do want to at least call out that this sort of thing is absolutely possible, especially when you start to work with much more custom needs. Or trickier files that your users might be coming in with. You have a lot of flexibility over manipulating data coming from a variety of sources. So I'll point out where these elements are from this plugin. I have one of the elements here, right? So this is actually pulling from the generated JSON details coming from the CSV uploader. This is the first plugin. And we're going to format that content. This repeating group here is actually pulling from that formatted content, and then inside of each cell, we're extracting things further. I have one for the title, one for the author, and ultimately all of that parsed information is just kind of passing its way through to these inner elements, will ultimately end up in the inside of the input. Okay, that way the user can see what it is their file contains. They can edit it if they want, and then add it to the library if they want to make that final decision. Okay, so like I said, there's actually quite a variety of methods and flows and different plugins too that can help you, in addition to the built-in stuff that Bubble has to pull in files, pull in information via CSV. Also keep in mind that when you bring in data, you can continue to trigger other actions, further modifications in your database in the same sequence, right? Like a single import could kick off another ripple effect of actions based on what it is you're doing. Maybe it sends notifications, maybe it updates other records, it updates counts of things, it calculates things. There's a lot you can do here. Also, leveraging external tools to help you manipulate data before you bring it in are pathways that we've seen our clients use as well. It really just depends on what it is you're doing in your own productivity app. Hopefully you've taken something away from this to understand, the level of complexity you can really put into this, not in a sense of making it harder for yourself, but actually in the sense of creating really rich and robust functionality to make your users' lives a lot easier. Now, another question that we get around importing data is, can I email information to the application so that things are updated? This is typically something to make things easier for the users, a feature for convenience, and absolutely you can. Now, this does involve working with APIs. You'll want to set up some kind of a shared inbox where your users can send attachments or send a note, and your application will receive that, parse everything out so that things get updated properly. This is actually easily done through Zapier as a tool to do a lot of that heavy lifting. And then your Bubble application can communicate with Zapier to parse everything out. We've seen it work many times with our own clients. It's awesome, a great convenience if that's something that makes sense for your application. We have the pleasure of working with so many wonderful clients with businesses and ideas for businesses that have been supercharged by their own Bubble apps. The productivity category is a common one we see for both personal and professional development. Let's take a look at two real Bubble apps from our own clients that contain many of the features falling under the productivity umbrella. Our first example is Ultimate Book List. This was created by a client of ours that is incredibly passionate about self-improvement, getting recommendations for books by experts that they look up to, finding related experts in similar spaces that they may have never otherwise heard about. There's a lot of search capability here. Relationships between the personalities and the books themselves is really the thing that makes this work very, very well for the user. Remember, the thing about productivity apps, regardless of what kind of focus the content is on, it's about accessibility of the content. It's making it easier for the user to organize things and find things. So if I wanted to click on a personality here, I'm going to be presented with a detail page. We're going to see similar things for the books as well. So this detail page, beautiful looking. We can favorite the personality. I can see what books they may have written. Maybe not all personalities will have written books themselves, but this one does. I can see all of the recommendations for them. I can favorite them. A really great thing about this approach here with Ultimate Book List is that all of the recommendations are cited. There's a source for every single book here to point us to where this expert talked about the book or wrote about the book, right? So there's a lot of authority that's happening here. I'm going to click on one of these books so that we can see, the equivalent detail page from that perspective. And here we have that similar page. So, we've got the author there. We have a description. We can save the book, mark it as read. This is really helpful for kind of keeping track, a personal list of books. You can go over to the Amazon link for it. And then you can see just from the other side of things, all of the various experts, celebrities, anybody who's kind of in the space tied to this book. This happens to be a novel here, but anyone who's recommended this book will show up, and that way you can kind of go through the web of recommendations and really discover things that you may otherwise never run into on your own. This application does a fantastic job of just organizing that content to make it accessible for users. So we consider it a great productivity application. Now, our next example here, also created by a client of ours, is Archive. This is something that helps you organize your projects in a portfolio type of style. There's also a lot of collaboration functionality in this particular application. Consider a scenario where you're an architect and you have all of these various assets and resources, images, notes, right, tags for things to document, the status of your project, or maybe, plans that you have for the project that you're collaborating on. We have organization around collections. So, what I was going through regarding tags and notes and folders, they've taken a spin on that and created collections because that, that terminology and the way that things are organized there make more sense for the type of content that's here, right? You have collaborators that can work together, they can communicate, things can be linked. And you can see kind of the market that this was meant for: students, professionals, institutions. This is very much a productivity app because, again, the organization of this type of content for this niche makes so much sense to make it easier for these users to come together, for their information to be housed in one reliable and consistent place, right? It could be their single source of truth for all of their project details. You can consider it a type of portfolio management system, even a project management system, but we very much consider this a productivity app as well, because it's helping these people stay productive. It's helping them move forward in their projects and stay organized. Makes it easy for them to find all of this information. So we love this one as well. It's a fantastic example of this type of app. All right, as you can see, there's a ton you can do with productivity apps in Bubble, and it's an excellent platform for this type of application. A lot of the entrepreneurs we help are building this type of app too. And from here, if you want to take the next step towards launching your own custom app, head over to our free extended training at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop. There, you'll learn how to properly scope your app, use Bubble to build it, and plan for the launch of a successful app-based business.